To our first presentation of today. This is going to be on instruction and programming. So first up, I'm going to have Sara Heimann and Krstevska. Sara and Summer, I think I see you both are co-hosts. So if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen, I'll get you all introduced. So once again, my name is Morgan. I am one of the co-chairs of the ELC. I'm the business and nonprofit librarian at the Greensboro Public Library. You've also probably gotten tons of emails from me. So we are going to be discussing today instruction and programming. We are going to have two presentations today talking about this topic. Each presentation is going to have 25 minutes to present, and I'm going to let the presenters know when they have 1 minute left. We are going to ask that you stick all questions you have for the presenters into the chat. We're going to try and leave about 5 minutes probably in between each presentation to get to those questions, get to as many as we can, but we do invite you to bring them to our last networking session at 5 o'clock today. And I will just ask that the presenters, if they're open to further questions, just drop your email addresses in the chat. So remember, keep those mics muted and those cameras off. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first presentation. So today's first presentation is primary research, not secondary for entrepreneurs. It's going to be presented by Sara Heimann, she, her, hers, who is the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Librarian at the University of California, Irvine Libraries. She provides research support and serves as the liaison librarian to UCI's interdisciplinary entrepreneurship community, including students, faculty, and researchers, as well as to teams participating in entrepreneurial competitions on campus. Sara received her MLIS from San José State University and holds a BS in accounting from Cal Poly Pomona. Next up, we have Krstevska, she, her, hers. She's the Business, Economics, and Data Access Librarian at Wake Forest University, where she supports BizU grads, as well as entrepreneurship minors and the economics programs. She is currently exploring her curiosities surrounding data visualization, primary research instruction for entrepreneurs, and teaching her 4-credit business research course asynchronously and abroad. She holds an MLIS from Simmons University in Boston, Massachusetts. So without further ado, Summer and Sara, take it away.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our session, Primary Research, Not Secondary for Entrepreneurs at the 2020 Entrepreneurship and Libraries Conference. Just to introduce ourselves one more time, my name is Sara Heimann, and I'm the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Librarian at the University of California, Irvine.
Hey everyone, my name is Summer Krstevska, and like Morgan so nicely put it, I'm the business librarian at Wake Forest University. So today we're going to be discussing both entrepreneurs and librarians' relationship with primary research, and we will be sharing with you 2 strategies for addressing entrepreneurs' primary research needs. One of these strategies will be an active learning exercise, and the other will be a research guide. Both of them are aimed at increasing entrepreneurs' familiarity with best practices for conducting primary research. So successful entrepreneurship research requires both primary and secondary research, as we probably all know. Yet most librarians focus exclusively on supporting secondary research. Our goal today is to shift this focus and inspire an open dialogue amongst librarians about ways that we can better support entrepreneurs conducting this type of research.
So before we dive in today, we wanted to take a quick moment to learn a little bit about who's attending this session by asking you to respond to a quick poll question about your affiliation. I am going to show the instructions here on how you can respond to the poll, and I'm also going to post a direct link into the chat that you can use. So hopefully everyone's maybe used Mentimeter or other similar polling tools before. You can go to menti.com and enter the code, or if your smartphone is capable, you can scan the QR code to respond. All right, looks like predominantly academic librarians here, just like Summer and I, but public library as well, and some others. So maybe if you've responded to other, maybe you could put in the chat, what institution or organization you're affiliated with. All right, thank you guys so much for responding to that. We will have 2 more questions later on in the session, so keep this window open if you want to continue to participate. And I will send it back over to Summer.
All right, so entrepreneurs' experience and relationship with primary research varies. Whether they're a current student or a community member, they come from a variety of disciplines and backgrounds. From my own experience as an entrepreneur, I've witnessed this firsthand amongst my accelerator cohort and even between me and my co-founder. I'm sure you all are probably having similar experiences if you're an academic librarian like myself, but I'm hearing more and more often from my entrepreneurship students that they're being asked to talk directly to the customer or the consumer before being asked to do any secondary research. Seemingly, entrepreneurship education is encouraging this bottom-up research approach because it better supports the lean startup method. But are students learning the best practices for primary research methods? Or are entrepreneurship faculty just assuming that they already have this knowledge? I recently polled my interdisciplinary entrepreneurship students about this very topic. Only 4 out of 14 of them said they had learned about primary research in a previous course. So some entrepreneurs have taken a research methods course as part of their formal education, but they may not recognize that these skills are transferable to entrepreneurial research, while others may not have even been introduced to the difference between primary and secondary research at all, despite primary research insights often being of extreme value to entrepreneurs, especially if they're developing emerging or niche products or services. We saw this as an opportunity for entrepreneurship librarians to fill this gap and to support students throughout the entire process rather than solely at the end of the process when they need secondary research support.
While most librarians are in agreement that primary research is a critical component of the entrepreneurial research process, there's been much less agreement on entrepreneurship librarians' role in supporting this primary research. Conversations with fellow business and entrepreneurship librarian colleagues have revealed varying opinions about who is or should be responsible for educating entrepreneurs about primary research, the level of expertise necessary to support this type of research, as well as the most effective methods for addressing entrepreneurs' primary research needs. While we're not claiming to be experts in primary research, we feel that as librarians, we would be remiss if we focused exclusively on secondary resources and strategies, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship, where we often run into questions that can't be answered by a database. I'm sure we've all experienced that. So since in our experience, primary research can be a bit of a polarizing topic among librarians, we wanted to know what your thoughts are on this issue by having you respond to another poll question where we wanted to ask, do you actively provide support related to primary research for your patrons? All right, I'm glad to see that the yes is getting a lot of responses. It seems to be winning right now. That's really good to hear. The rest is a little bit split. So thank you for responding to this. And if you're someone who answered no, you don't currently provide support in this area, but you'd like to, hopefully the 2 strategies we share next can kind of inspire you to maybe incorporate some of this into your work. So I'm going to send it back over to Summer.
All right, so as mentioned earlier, we're going to be sharing 2 strategies to help familiarize entrepreneurship students with primary research. The first one is an active learning exercise on market validation research, providing entrepreneurs with the opportunity to practice developing primary research survey questions. This is a multi-part exercise. It has 4 parts. I'm going to be diving into each part as the slides progress, but I just wanted to let you all know that this exercise was designed to be adaptable to various types of instruction sessions, as well as different online modalities by incorporating online collaboration tools. This exercise was tested in a 4-credit online fully asynchronous environment over the course of a week, despite our original plans to debut it in an in-person one-shot session. But due to the current circumstances around COVID-19, that had to change. So for the first part of the multi-part exercise, we would suggest that you start with a survey or a poll to determine your students' prior exposure to or familiarity with primary research. As you can see here, this is the result from one of our questions we asked, which was, have you conducted your own primary research? 5 students said they had done primary research before. We will talk more about the results on the next slide. But I just wanted to point out that we did this survey through a Google form, and we made sure to define primary research in the instructions so that the students had some context prior to answering. And we also thought that this survey, doing it first, is a great opportunity to model ethical and effective survey design with the questions we asked. So as I mentioned, here are some of the results in depth. These are examples of the primary research. How many times have I said primary research in this presentation? I'm starting to get tongue-tied. So as you can see here, they're talking a lot about surveys, interviews, and polls, which is great. But you can see, I think it's a second comment, one of the students said, at the time, I didn't know it was primary research. And this comment relates directly back to what I was saying on a previous slide. Like maybe they've had primary research methods, courses in different disciplines, and they're not making that connection between the transferability of the skills to entrepreneurship. All right, so for the second part, after the students completed the survey, we asked them to come up with and share 3 questions they would like to ask their potential customer to further validate their product or service. On the slide, you can see 2 examples of students' questions. I'll let you look at that while I continue to talk about it. In this particular class, each student already had brainstormed a business idea for their final project. So we pivoted from our original idea to provide the entire class with the same case study to instead allowing them to use their projects as the basis for this activity. On a side note, because this class was asynchronous, we used a Canvas discussion board instead of our original plan to use Padlet. These adjustments really demonstrate how easily this activity can be adjusted to fit your instruction modality, the assignment, your course management software, or whatever online tool you prefer to use. Later in the week, for part 3, the students were asked to read some best practices for survey question design, including what's listed here on the slide, some best practices about asking for personal information, sensitive questions, closed and open-ended questions, and leading and loaded questions. Once they had done that, they were asked to go back to the original Canvas discussion board to review their questions, to review their classmates' questions and come up with some instructive criticism to suggest how they could improve their original question to better fit with the best practices. And as you can see here, in the example, the students' comprehension of the best practices is clearly reflected in their responses to their classmates. The response here mentions, oh, that question you wrote is a loaded question. Here's a better way to write it. And again, in this second example, the student is also pointing out a potential loaded question. This activity received really great feedback from the students. You could see here, I really liked how we were able to respond to each other's questions. It's worth mentioning, encouraging the students to go back to that original Canvas discussion board really promoted engagement and community building in the asynchronous environment. You'd be surprised, the students really don't respond to each other unless they have to. So that was a plus, and they really liked being able to give that instructive criticism to their classmate, but also receiving it to improve their own responses.
And for those of you that may not have the opportunity to incorporate an active learning exercise into your workshops or instruction sessions, another low stakes way that you can support primary research is to create a LibGuide or a research guide with primary research content, or add this content to an existing guide. So on my entrepreneurship research guide, I have a market validation tab that includes subpages with guidance, explanations, resources, and tools for conducting surveys, interviews, and focus groups. As Summer mentioned earlier, many entrepreneurs are unfamiliar with primary research, especially the term, and how this can be applied to entrepreneurship. So that's why I chose to call this area of my guide market validation rather than primary research, because market validation is really a buzz term that I thought would be more accessible to this audience. So this guide serves as an asynchronous resource to provide guidance and resources regarding methodology, research tools, and ethical considerations involved in primary research. And to show you what this looks like, I'm going to give you a really brief tour of the guide's market validation pages. So here, this is the homepage of my guide, and you can see here in the second row, I have a market validation tab. So the first page is just, called Getting Started. And this introduces the topic of market validation research, and then kind of links this topic to the concept of primary research to help patrons make the connection between the two terms. It also has definitions for some key terms that are used on the guide, like primary and secondary research, quantitative and qualitative data, and closed and open-ended questions. The second page has a top 5 list of ethical research guidelines that touch on some things like confidentiality, data security, and personally identifiable information. The next page is called Research Methods and Sample Size. And this page just basically gives an overview of what we consider the 3 common primary research methods: surveys, interviews, and focus groups. There's a chart here with a definition of each, as well as the pros and cons of each method. And since surveys are usually the most popular method, the next page has a top 5 list of survey tips. And these are to help entrepreneurs avoid common pitfalls in survey design and hopefully create a survey that will increase response rate. So these survey tips were actually developed in response to an experience that I had where I received a survey from a startup team that had what I considered to be some pretty major flaws. And then these tips in turn were the basis for the survey design best practices that we developed for part 3 of the exercise that Summer described earlier. The next page provides a list of primary research tools, so things like Qualtrics and Google Forms for surveys. And then, just personal to my library, I've also included a link to our Multimedia Resources Center, which offers AV equipment like recorders, microphones, as well as iPads that can be checked out and used by teams that want to conduct interviews or surveys in person. And then the last page has a selection of eBooks about market validation research and primary research methods for patrons that want to explore these topics in greater detail. So that's just kind of a brief tour of the guide. Since it was published in February, it's had over 300 views. And in that time frame, some of the most popular pages have been the Getting Started page, and then the top 5 ethical guidelines and survey tips pages. The popularity of these pages, I think, is really an indication that not only is the term market validation really resonating with entrepreneurs, I don't think I'd see the kind of traction if I had called this section primary research. But it's also an indication that there's really a need for this type of primary research support within the entrepreneurship community. The guide has also provided a useful touch point for me in research consultations and instruction sessions. So when a patron asks a question that would be best served by primary rather than secondary research, it gives me something tangible to point them to, and it can often help them kind of make that distinction between primary and secondary research. It's also helpful for them to have something to refer back to after a consultation or workshop, so it's something available at their point of need.
So as you can probably tell, both Sarah and I have seen some positive outcomes from incorporating primary research content into our reference and instruction. we hope you're interested in talking more about this, because as mentioned earlier, our goal really is to open up a dialogue about primary research and inspire other librarians to think of ways they can support entrepreneurs in this area. We'd really like to field any questions about our methods or open the floor for a brief discussion on what others have done or are considering doing to incorporate primary research into their business or entrepreneurship instruction or library support.
And I know we are, oh no, I was just going to say we are taking questions in the chat now, but we did have just one more slide that just allows you to kind of share your thoughts and an opportunity just to enter your answer, but you're also definitely welcome to put questions and comments in the chat, and I think Morgan will field those for us. So just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Summer and Sarah. So I'm going to turn things over to Natalie, who is our fabulous chat manager for this session. And so we've got until 2 o'clock. So get that discussion rolling and questions asking.
Perfect, thank you. Was collecting some of the comments, and you know, some of them I think could lead to more discussion. And so just want to start out, there was a little bit of conversation about, you know, primary research, what do you call it? And I think both Summer and Sarah, you all covered that very well. But there was a comment, and it was, in academia, primary research has added to the complexity of IRB approval, and it's not something that undergraduate students typically undertake. So I was just wondering if one or both of you could talk about, do you ever mention IRB, or does that come across for you as you're doing this primary research with undergraduates?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'll respond to this first, just because actually I have actually done a lot of considering of whether IRB kind of applies to this market validation research. If any of you did attend, I did a BRAS presentation for their online symposium back in April, and I focused a bit more on that topic because when this topic of primary research came up for me, my first instinct was, does that require IRB approval? And it really wasn't clear to me. I did a bit of investigating. There wasn't a lot of information out there. I reached out to UCI's IRB office and asked them, and sort of the conclusion that we came to was that you know, the type of research that entrepreneurs are doing is not necessarily generalizable and something that's necessarily going to be published. It's more like sort of internal information that they're using to make business decisions. So that's kind of our take on it right now. I do, on the guide, on the ethical guidelines page, reference IRB just to bring it to their attention, provide a link so they can learn more about it. And then, you know, say that if you're doing this for a class, you know, it's unlikely that you would need IRB approval, but definitely something that they want to be aware of and keep in mind.
Yeah, and just going off what Sarah said, it goes with the argument, right? Are they even being taught best practices, or is that an assumption? I think that could potentially be like a gap that librarians fill. Like, me and Sarah haven't figured this all out. We just want to talk more about it, and we both are fascinated by what we could do. So I think that is an interesting point about IRB, and I know it kind of varies from institution to institution how strict that can be as well.
Thank you. And so we did have also a little bit more like specific questions. So one of them being, do you make a distinction between primary data collection and primary data analysis?
That is a good question. I mean, when I taught the survey exercise, we did not even go into data collection and how to analyze it. I think, again, that's another area that maybe some librarians will feel comfortable helping with, or maybe you direct them in a different direction to analyze their results. I don't know if Sarah's had more students come to her with this type of question.
You know, I actually haven't too much. I think at this point, we're just trying to kind of make them aware that they need to be going out and talking to customers, and kind of that primary research means collecting and analyzing that data yourself, because they often just, you know, want to find that data in, you know, a market research report. They want that nice little percentage that they can just plug into their pitch deck. So I think it's just kind of at a base level right now, just getting them aware of these topics. But that's definitely something that maybe I'll build out in the future on the guide.
Yeah, I think too, a lot of the best practices they lean towards, set it up this way. Not only is it more ethical and you'll get more honest responses, but it's easier to analyze in the long run. So I think there is an opportunity for that conversation, at least when you're talking about best practices.
Thank you. So I'll move on to a bit more of a broader question, and then maybe we can get back to those specific ones. And so this one's coming from your board, actually. So what are your recommendations to engage faculty members to advocate for libraries as support for primary research?
I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that? I didn't hear the second half.
Oh, no, of course. So your recommendations to engage faculty members to advocate for libraries as support for primary research.
That's a good question. I think what happened to Sarah when she noticed, she went to a student event and saw the survey and it had flaws in it, like being able to actually bring something like that to the faculty and saying like, I can help with this, like really making it aligned with their assignments. We talk about this a lot in academic librarianship, right? Like really making what we do relevant and trying to translate our value in that way.
Definitely. I agree with Summer. I think having that kind of tangible product is something, that might make a big impact. I think, at UCI, we have a lot of great resources and services for entrepreneurs. We have a really great, innovation center and incubator and things like that. And I know that they have their own I-Corps program, I think NSF I-Corps, where they really dive deep over a few weeks into kind of primary research and talking to customers, but it's a very selective program and not something that's maybe as accessible, especially to undergraduate students. So I think kind of positioning the library as sort of an alternative to that can help prepare them to enter those programs later on in their journey.
I think too, I'm sure many of us have had this experience when we're working with students, right? It's like you don't have the information they need, and it isn't because it doesn't exist necessarily. It's just like, oh, you got to go talk directly to the customer or someone in the industry. And I think when those types of examples pop up in our consultations, like we can use those stories to like show as an example, right? Like the library has these great resources, but really like as the faculty probably already know this, since they're already encouraging their students to go out there and talk to the customers, like how can we help them do that in the best possible way? And I think showing that we notice those gaps alone shows our value and our expertise in research in general.
So I think we're getting close here to the end, so I don't want to maybe start another bigger question, but there were a few questions about the link to the LibGuide, and I'm sure we're going to get your presentation, and also a possible link to your information literacy course, Summer, that you mentioned that you built this a part of. If you would be willing to share that as well, I think it would be much appreciated with everyone.
Yeah, I'll put details in the chat. Thanks everyone for listening.
I will post a link to the guide also.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Summer and Sarah. That was really interesting. I'm going to need more sticky notes. I took so many notes. So fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
and Summer and Sarah, if you wouldn't mind also just putting your emails in the chat too. I think you have a lot of people very eager to speak with you. In the meantime, I'm going to ask Carey and Sarah, second Sarah Shujah, to go ahead and get their slides up while I introduce them. So we have Aligning Business Literacy with Startup Thinking, a series of open workshops for the second half of our session on instruction and programming. And presenting, we have Sara Shujah, she, her, hers. Sara is a liaison librarian at entrepreneurship librarian at the University of Toronto Scarborough Library. She's a recent graduate of the SPARC Open Education Fellow, in which she developed an entrepreneurship OER in addition to open education Education, Sara coordinates entrepreneurship research workshops, a woman non-binary entrepreneur meetup, and the university's Indigenous Book Club. She applies an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens in her work that includes OER, information literacy, entrepreneurship, and professional development. Joining Sara is Carey Toane, she, her, hers. Carey is entrepreneurship librarian at the Gerstein Science Information Center at the University of Toronto, where she supports current and future U of T startups in their ventures. A former journalist and copywriter, her current research focuses on the information habits and needs of academic entrepreneurs. Without further ado, welcome Carey and Sara.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thank you also to Sara and Summer for your awesome presentation. I think it dovetails really nicely with what we're going to talk about today. So, and also happy Friday the 13th, everyone. I think, am I the first one to wish everyone that dubious honor today? Okay, well, hopefully it's lucky. So my name's Carey Toane, and I'm here with Sara Shujah, as well as our colleague Holly Inglis, who is not going to be speaking in the presentation today, but is part of the group who has put this presentation together. In true startup fashion, we're going to start today with the needs of our users. Then we'll discover our workshop series model and look at 3 examples of how we align business literacy skills with startup thinking before we move to the Q&A. First, we'll share a little bit about our library, our institution, and our startup community. So the University of Toronto is almost 200 years old, located in Toronto's downtown on the north shore of Lake Ontario in the province of Ontario, Canada. Today, we have 153 librarians at over 40 libraries on 3 campuses, supporting 93,000 full-time students. There are presently 11 accelerators supporting early-stage startups across campus. So when I started in this role, this was my first question: who are our campus entrepreneurs? We ran a formal research survey in 2016, and this is data from that survey, which we're actually relaunching this fall. And that data at that time informed some of the choices that we made about the workshops we ran. So of the 52 disciplines represented in the survey participants, engineering, management, and computer science accounted for approximately 1/3, and health sciences was also up there. 1/3 of respondents were currently enrolled in an entrepreneurship course or program, so a curricular focus, and 1/3 in a current or past accelerator cohort, so a co-curricular focus. There's also research commercialization emphasis at University of Toronto. We are the home of the discovery of insulin 100 years ago, and in the past 10 years, more than 500 research-based startups have been launched from U of T. Of those who work with the library in terms of startups, based on the data we have, the great majority are in this sort of startup stage 0 to 2, so up to the point where they've developed an MVP and are looking to validate, but are still pre-launch. So what this data told us at the time was that we weren't going to be able to go to just one faculty to find and reach these people, but that we would need to create a pull model to draw people into the library by offering open workshops that appeal to startups across campus and that could create awareness of the library's resources and services. We also found that that the startups' research habits and needs were different from those of typical academic researchers and of typical business students in many ways. So in terms of information sources, the majority don't come to the library for help. They have an emphasis on primary over secondary and free over paid research sources. Fundamentally, they just Google and talk to their founders or mentors, and hopefully also at some point their customers or potential customers. In terms of research training, the majority describe themselves as self-taught, and the majority also don't have any formal business degree or training. Some do receive training via the accelerator or library, but they are in the minority. In terms of data points, they're looking for information on their competitors, on their customer segmentation, on new and emerging industries, as well as traditional target industries, and information on their tech platforms. So this meant that we'd have to think a little differently about what we offered and how we positioned it, and we'll address these points, or a lot of these points, in the examples we raise later in the presentation. So now we'd like to hear from you. I'm a little concerned about this technology. I don't know if you guys can see this. Can you see the Padlet here? Can anyone see it?
We cannot carry. This is
Okay,
Morgan.
hold on. Yes, so let me I'll just do this, and then I need to, can you see it now?
Not yet. Nope,
No.
we're still seeing your slides.
Okay, hang on. Yeah, it wasn't giving me the option of sharing my monitor. It was just giving me the option of sharing my program. So I'll just quickly, now can you see it?
Beautiful, Carey. Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So we're just going to address question number 1, but please leave this open. What unique research needs or challenges do your startups have? And we're getting this in real time here. Main Street enterprises, so the funding sources are very limited. Okay. Yes, we have this as well, where they're looking for very specific information on a country that is not Canada or the United States. And so it can be difficult to find. Yeah, finding information on non-traditional business ideas, absolutely. Finding access to the specialized market research reports. Yes, they find it on Google and say, can you please buy this $7,000 report for me? How to get them to come to the workshops, yeah, and researching the market. And also perhaps being an entrepreneur of color, like a person of color in the entrepreneurship community. Protecting IP. Okay, so a real range of challenges, but yeah, okay. So, sorry, this is gonna be a little clunky now. I gotta go back just 1 minute. Okay, bear with me. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the second part, looking at our workshop series structure and model. So just a little bit of background. We have currently 6 librarians on 3 campuses who instruct the sessions, one of whom also coordinates the program. The series started and was built on an existing Introduction to Business Resources workshop that actually Holly and another colleague created for engineering students at U of T. And that has since been integrated into the series and actually expanded and split into 2 one-hour sessions. The workshops are open to participants of any role, degree type, or discipline, which is an advantage for those who don't have entrepreneurship courses or who can't take them through their program, or who are looking for a more sort of risk-free, non-credited introduction to the topic. So at the URL there at the bottom, you'll see a link to all of the more in-depth descriptions. So we framed the workshop series as the Entrepreneurship Research Skills Workshop Series, which has 6 sessions, 3 at the introductory level and 3 more in-depth sessions. So these can be taken individually or as a series, and there aren't any prerequisites for any of the workshops. We consider this to be the core research skill set that an early stage entrepreneur might need, and we try not to overlap too much in terms of content from one session to the next. So each session stands alone, but also aligns with the others. To do this, we structure it to scaffold information to allow them to build on what they've learned as they progress. We schedule them so the intro sessions occur at the start of each semester and the in-depth sessions later in the term. We don't always offer all the in-depth sessions every semester, but we make sure that we run them each at least once in an academic year. The introductory sessions are all 1 hour long and designed to introduce concepts and resources to address the basic skill set before they commit to an idea. Often they're still sort of deciding. Launchpad is an introduction to the university startup ecosystem at U of T, the library, as well as the accelerators, pitch competitions, and the tech transfer office and other services. This was and is still the only orientation to the campus ecosystem that exists. Lately, we've coordinated these with the U of T Entrepreneurship Office, so we'll have them come in and as a guest speaker, or we'll set up a student startup panel, and we build in networking opportunities as well. The company and industry workshops introduce basic concepts that impact information access, as well as critical evaluation of resources. These do have a bit heavier focus on the licensed databases in the active learning exercises, and we'll look at these in examples in part 3. Moving to the in-depth sessions, these are normally 2 hours long when we hold them in person, but some of the active elements have been cut in remote contexts, and we're trying in general to keep our remote sessions shorter. So these are now, it ranges from an hour to maybe 90 minutes long. The business model canvas session takes that company and industry research and plugs it into a business model structure. So participants are starting to synthesize the information that they find, and we'll show you what that looks like, or kind of a taste of that in a minute. The patent session highlights open web databases for patent searching, an overview of classification systems, or classification searching, I should say, and breaks down a patent into its parts. Primary research focuses on the methodologies most relevant to startups, and then apply those to building good survey and interview questions. And they also do a pairs interview exercise using a template to identify problem solution fit. So again, if you want to see the full descriptions, we can drop that URL into the chat, and we've also included those in the slides. So how do we encourage students to complete the sessions? So one way we do this is through what we call a co-curricular record. This is a U of T term, not a library term. It's a micro-credential program that offers opportunities for students to build their skills outside of classes and have those accomplishments added to an official university document. I've heard them referred to as digital badges or nano degrees at other institutions as well. So we break it down in that the students need to take all 3 introductory sessions and minimum 1 of the in-depth sessions, so 5 hours in total. Nowadays, if they just take 1 of the in-depth sessions, even though it's less than 2 hours, they still get the credit for that. And then after they complete those hours, then they need to complete a reflection document. And that includes questions on what they learned, how they applied or plan to apply that learning, and what feedback they have on the series. Now, there is no requirement to complete the CCR, so a student can enroll, and then decide later whether or not to complete it. In pre-COVID times, attendance was done by swiping the student card in person, and then they'd have to be there for the full session. Now they have to have registered via Zoom, and then they need to follow up with the instructor by email after the sessions. Those who do choose to complete the CCR often do so because it guides their learning, it tracks their learning, and some do use the official doc that they get from the university to apply for things like internships and jobs, sometimes graduate school. A few quick stats on the workshop series from the first 4 years of the program. So in this time, we've seen 437 participants in the workshops, and we've taught 65 sessions. 64% of those who attended signed up for the CCR, and of that 64%, 20% completed the CCR. Since COVID, all library workshops have been virtual, and we've seen a significant increase in attendance, although CCR enrollment has gone down. We suspect that this is due in part, at least, to the logistics of signing up virtually. And so we are looking at ways to deal with that going forward. So now I'm going to pass it over to Sara, who's going to lead the next part of the session. And I'm going to have to just flip over to the Padlet again.
So we want to pause again and hear from you. So please go back to the Padlet. I popped it into the chat. And we're just going to be focusing on the second question, which asks you to consider how you might develop sustained engagement with your entrepreneurs. So we'll just give you just under a minute to answer that. Badges, certificates, perhaps it's something you're already offering, could be even digital badges. Online communities like Slack. I like that idea. I'm seeing the live happening live, so I'm just trying to read them. Incorporate hooks, questions that are unanswered. Oh, I like that idea too. So after your workshops, emailing attendees with your recordings is really helpful in keeping them engaged with you. Great, thank you. Those are some great answers. Please come back to those later for ideas. So on to the third question. And that question will just lead us into part 3, where we'll talk about bridging business research skill competencies for startups.
Can you see that?
We don't see the Padlet, we see the presentation.
Okay, one sec.
Thanks. The joy of virtual presentations. Thanks for your patience, folks. What we can do is we can come back to it maybe later if we have time, and perhaps we can continue with the presentation. Oh, okay. Basic business literacy. Agree. I think a lot of the times if they don't have business backgrounds, that's going to be key. Finding people to survey, that's a good point. Yeah. Online marketing in many shapes and forms. How do they do that? And also concept mapping and connecting their ideas to each other. And yeah, thank you so much for those answers. So we're going to move on to part 3 of our presentation. And this is where we're going to give you some examples of how we bridge basic business research skills with meeting the needs of startups. So when we say familiar business research skills, we're referring to, for example, what is outlined in the ALA-RUSA Business Research Competencies Guidelines, though there are others like the ACR-IL framework if you're in academic libraries. But we wanted to try to reflect and integrate these competencies in our workshops in a way that's relevant to startups. So looking at the foundational competencies, understanding the business information environment means that a researcher understands how information is produced, published, and accessed, and how that can be easier or harder depending on the resource and its context. Business research strategies and techniques can refer to planning, searching, organizing, and synthesizing information that they find, and what do they do when they can't find information. So RUSA also lists a number of topical competencies, of which in our workshops we focus on 5 of them: company, industry, market, legal, and disciplinary. And in this context, we're thinking of disciplinary in terms of the culture and practice of startups. So we're going to look at 3 examples from our workshops based on common questions we get from startups, and then link these to relevant research competencies with the needs of startups. For each question, we're going to look at insights, so what we know about our entrepreneurs and their research needs, discuss our approach to bridging traditional business research skills with startup thinking, and then show an example of how we apply this approach in our workshop. So our first question is, what is my industry? Which we address in our industry research workshop. So the insight here is that the focus on traditional industry classifications don't always apply. Startups often are in new and emerging markets that aren't always covered by NAICS, and segmentation often excludes technology platforms. So our approach to this insight in the workshop is that we focus on the data points in the industry reports rather than teaching to classification systems. And then we also introduce concepts of segmentation to interpret data in relevant ways. The research strategies and techniques we're introducing is to analyze and parse out the industry while also identifying data sources for their do-it-yourself market sizing frameworks. That leads to the lesson example from the workshop. So we address this approach by designing new ways of segmenting markets that incorporate technology platforms, as example by the CB Insights graphics, which we show in class. We also discuss market sizing as a concept and refer to Steve Blank's framework of TAM, SAM, and TM. So typically markets focus on TAM or SAM with segmentation, which requires extra estimations. So we introduce bottom-up and top-down market sizing approaches with sources of information to inform their market sizing, along with the market sizing tutorial that's openly accessible. The second question we get by startups is about helping them to find information about their competitors. And we address this in the company and competitor research workshop. Here, the insight is that a startup may not consider indirect competition, but instead they assume that they don't have any competitors. Their competitors may be from other industries or markets they don't immediately see. When you do identify similar products or services, data on private and startup companies are difficult to find. And with public company profiles, when they're available, although sometimes they're not granular enough, startups are often competing on a single product, as such, are looking for details on a single business unit. So we approach this insight in our lesson by addressing access to public and private company information. We explain the limitations of company information, where it is available and why, and what isn't typically available, which speaks to the business information environment. And then we introduce tools for information synthesis like the SWOT analysis and petal diagrams, which is a business research strategy and technique. So in the workshop, they gain hands-on experience with reading a 10K. We introduce tools like Frost & Sullivan, CB Insights, Crunchbase to find private and startup competitors. This graphic from Frost & Sullivan demonstrates a competitive set of small satellite companies based on their value proposition for comparison. And then they often find that their competitors are in a combination of sectors since their startups tend to be disruptive technologies. So one of the last questions we commonly get is, why do I even need library research? And hopefully we're addressing this in all of our workshops. But in this example, we are going to focus on our researching our business model canvas workshop, though the insights can apply to all of our workshops. So the insight here is that startups' information seeking behavior typically rely on Google and free tools for secondary sources. And they don't always consider the library as a resource. So we approach this is that we meet the startups where they are by integrating free and open tools such as Google, Business Model Canvas, online videos and tutorials, consulting firms, industry reports to help inform their business plans. We mix in proprietary resources and demonstrate their value by integrating them into frameworks in useful and convenient ways. And you'll notice that this in-depth workshop draws upon more skills and competencies than our intro-level workshops. So the lesson example is that we use an open tool, so in this case, the business model canvas, and we relate the information need to the best fit resources that are both open and proprietary. So we do this by sharing two maps of the business model canvas, one for proprietary and one for open, that help to address questions in each segment of the canvas. This lets us integrate interdisciplinary and applied resources. This makes it fast and convenient for our users to integrate library tools into their search strategy. And we just wanted to note, we wanted to credit the business model canvas mapping to Terrence O'Neill, who developed it when he was the entrepreneurship librarian at the university or Michigan State University, and he gave us permission to adapt it. Our second map uses credible open sources of information, and we separate them only because of space. And you can find these at our library guide listed on the screen. So that brings us to our end of our session. And to summarize, when you're developing workshops or series, get to know your entrepreneurs and their information needs. Consider how to maintain that connection through existing partners or community services and programs like a micro-credential. And then lastly, meet your entrepreneurs where they are by designing workshops that answer common questions they have, integrate open tools, and bridge traditional business literacy with the startup context. So hopefully we have some time for questions. Thank you so much. Our contact information is there, including Holly, who's part of our team. And thanks.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Carey and Sarah. Also need to definitely bag more sticky notes. So much to explore.
Thanks, Morgan.
So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Natalie. I know we have some questions in the chat.
Bring it.
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. Yeah, there was definitely a lot of questions. So hopefully we can get through most of them. So going back and when you were talking about the survey, there was a question in how did you reach the non-library user to fill out the survey? And I think that's something we're always, wanting to know and do better.
Yeah, so that was, I'll take that one. That was a project that I led when back in 2016, I started in the fall of 2015. And so we did a formal research project. So we got a research ethics board protocol, and then we rolled out a survey. So at University of Toronto, you need support from the vice provosts to survey students and these kinds of things. And so after we had that approval, as well as the REB, we went out and did as systematic as we could. So through the faculties, through all the library channels, through the accelerators and the office at the time, which has since evolved and changed a little bit. And we did get what I consider to be a pretty honest and unbiased approach. So even amongst those people who maybe had met a librarian in their class to do a research workshop through like a tech venture class, they wouldn't necessarily otherwise consider the library when they were doing their startup proper, for instance. But yeah, this time around, we're running our data collection right now, and we're again trying to get it out through neutral channels. So reaching faculty through faculty communications channels, putting it out through departments. So people that the library isn't necessarily, it's through a snowball technique, isn't necessarily working with directly.
Thank you. And Sarah, you did kind of touch on this a bit, but there was a question on, are these classes interactive or strictly lecture style?
So we have a mix of us that teach it, and based on the ones that I've helped to facilitate, they are interactive, and also the ones that I've attended to. So for example, the primary research strategies workshop is super interactive and engaging in a similar way that Sarah and Summer presented. The industry research workshop, there's different activities that they do as well, and finding resources. And if they don't have something to search, we give them examples to help them engage with some of the databases and the resources. Carey or Holly, did you want to add anything to that?
We do hold them in the lab, and so there are always some sort of active learning strategies, whether they're getting into the databases to apply some of the things that we've demonstrated through to their own research questions, or then, you know, we'll have a panel and networking kind of activities as well, so they can meet each other. In the business model canvas, they're supposed to bring their own canvas. I make them share their canvases with the group and these kinds of things. So yeah, there are interactive elements. It's been a bit challenging with COVID. Some of those are tricky, you know, but we're figuring out how to use breakout rooms and these kinds of things. Holly, do you want to add anything? I don't know, maybe she's,
yeah. I take the patents where somebody was like, oh, I shy away from the patents. And we have an engineering librarian who teaches a patents workshop, and she even gives them a little bit of homework that they send to her afterwards on patent searching, and it's a pretty amazing workshop.
So we do also have another question, and I think it was also kind of a follow-up to someone else's comment on it. So I'm sorry if you don't actually use the term micro-credential for your co-curricular course, but the question was, do you have a sense of what value students see in, and in this case, they said the micro-credential, but I think, you know, in taking the course and completing, for example, do they put it on LinkedIn, et cetera?
I know from the reflection documents how people use the information that they learn in the workshop. So there's two things. There's, you know, the value of the content that they've carried forward out of the workshops, and then the co-curricular record. So it will only appeal to, as we've seen from our stats, a proportion of the participants. It's also only open to students. So any faculty or staff wouldn't be eligible for that as well. So they would necessarily be excluded from that. A lot of people sign up, they get excited, or they see other people swiping their card and they're like, hey, why not? I'll come and do it too. And then they don't necessarily finish it. And like we said, that's absolutely fine. But for those who do it, and we do see every term we get regulars, I'll see the same names popping up in the registration. And so those people, some people are co-curricular record people, and that's what they're doing. They take every opportunity they can, and they're maybe looking at that to kind of build out their resume and track their learning, or also to guide their learning. So, you know, they appreciate the structure of it because it gives them a sense, especially if they're very new to entrepreneurship, of the kinds of things they can be learning. If you don't know what you don't know, it can be helpful in that sense as well.
All right, we're coming close to time here. Got maybe time for one more question, Natalie? Anything?
Sure. There's one more that I think maybe, do you completely shy away from NAICS or SICs, considering they are filled within business databases?
I would say we don't necessarily teach to classification system, meaning that we may mention it and point it out in a report, and to like take note of it, as it might help you find other reports in other databases. I know in like research consults that can come up, especially if you're searching in simply analytics, makes it a little bit easier to find those businesses.
It really depends on the
Yeah.
sector that they're operating in. So sometimes it's really useful. I've been in a couple research consultations where it's blown the person's mind because they were actually looking for a way to organize different industries as part of what they're doing, or how to distinguish and segment that way. So it can be helpful. However, there are real limitations to them and they tend to be very slow. So certain NAICS categories, you'll be in, computer engineering or software or something forever, and a whole universe of Silicon Valley is under one. It's not necessarily particularly helpful in some instances. It is helpful if maybe you're looking at like a target industry and trying to get a sense of potential customers or applications.
Yeah, and it's also just based on who our entrepreneurs are on campus, and what we're finding, they really do merge between different sectors. So there isn't one unique NAICS for them. So it doesn't really speak to our entrepreneurs in that way all the time.
If we get questions about them, of course, we explain what they are. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Let's give a virtual round of applause for all 4 of our fabulous presenters today, both Sarah's, Summer, and Carey, for this session on instruction and programming. So we are going to be taking a 30-minute break until 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So what we're going to be doing from 3 to 4 is kind of experimental for us. So we're going to be doing a discussion forum via breakout rooms. I think a few weeks back, we polled you to see what topics you all would be interested in talking about in smaller rooms. So that's what we're going to try and do. Now, to help facilitate this, do want you to check and make sure your Zoom accounts are updated. So check to make sure that they're updated to help facilitate busting out into these breakout rooms in the simplest way possible. If not, we have some workarounds, but do take a look at that.